Tequila. In 1758, a landowner named José Antonio de Cuervo secured a grant from the Spanish crown to farm blue agave outside the town of Tequila in Jalisco. The distillery his family founded, La Rojeña, is still running, which makes it the oldest tequila producer on record. By law, the spirit comes from one plant and one plant only, Agave tequilana, the blue Weber agave. Most drinkers never notice the loophole built into that law. A bottle needs to be only 51% agave to legally call itself tequila, and the rest can come from cane or corn sugar. That cheaper mixto style is what fills most margaritas poured outside Mexico. Only bottles marked 100% agave are the real thing, and regulations require those to be distilled and bottled in Mexico. On the palate, it runs bright and peppery, with a faint sweetness and a green vegetal snap from the cooked agave. In 1974, it became the first Mexican product ever granted a denomination of origin, which is the legal reason nothing distilled anywhere else can carry the name. Mezcal. The word comes from the Nahuatl mezcali, oven-cooked agave, and the category is both older and far wider than its famous relative. Every tequila is technically a mezcal. Not every mezcal can be a tequila. The lineage traces to the 1500s, when Spanish colonists, short on brandy, pointed a still at the fermented agave the Aztecs were already drinking. Where tequila allows a single species, mezcal can be made from more than 30, though a workhorse agave called espadín accounts for most of it. The signature is fire. The hearts are roasted in earthen pits over hot rocks and wood, which is where mezcal picks up the smoke tequila doesn't have. Then there's the worm. The lava at the bottom of certain bottles is neither traditional nor a mark of quality. It's a moth larva, Comadia retenbacheri, first dropped into bottles as a marketing gimmick in the 1940s, usually credited to a seller named Jacobo Lozano Paez. Until mezcal won its own denomination of origin in 1994, nearly every bottle exported to the United States carried one. Raicilla. The name means little root, and it's a fib that lasted 3 centuries. When Spanish tax collectors came through the hills of Jalisco taxing mezcal, distillers swore their spirit was drawn from the roots of the plant rather than the heart, which made it, conveniently, a different product and an untaxed one. It never came from the roots at all. Made in the coastal country around Puerto Vallarta and the mountain towns of Mascota and San Sebastián del Oeste, Raicilla spent generations written off as backwoods moonshine. It's distilled from whichever agave suits the region. Maximiliana up in the Sierra, Angustifolia, and one called Pata de Mula, foot of the mule, down on the coast, which spreads its flavor anywhere from floral and fruity to lightly smoky. Some bartenders have taken to calling it Mexican gin. In 2019, it finally received its own denomination of origin across 16 municipalities in Jalisco and one in Nayarit. And that recognition came with an irony. Because Jalisco sits outside the mezcal zone, Raicilla is legally forbidden from being labeled mezcal, which is exactly what it has always been. Bacanora. In 1915, the governor of Sonora, Plutarco Elias Calles, who would later become president of Mexico, outlawed the state's homemade agave spirit, blaming alcohol for moral rot and a failing economy. The ban lasted 77 years. Bacanora didn't die. It moved into hidden mountain stills fired with mesquite, while its makers were fined, jailed, and in some cases executed for the crime of producing it. Named for a town in the Sierra Madre, it comes from a single wild agave, Agave angustifolia, roasted in pits much like mezcal, and it lands between tequila's pepper and mezcal's smoke, earthy with a clean edge. Prohibition wasn't lifted until 1992, and the denomination of origin followed in 2000, covering 35 municipalities in Sonora. Sonora shares a border with Arizona, and Bacanora was a fixture across the American Southwest before the ban, which leaves an open question about how large it might have grown had the state not spent most of a century trying to erase it. Sotol. Despite sitting on the shelf right beside tequila and mezcal, Sotol isn't an agave spirit at all. For centuries, the spiky desert plant it comes from was assumed to be a kind of agave, until DNA testing in the 1990s reassigned it to the asparagus family. The plant is Dacilerion, the desert spoon, a relative so distant it barely shares a branch with true agave. It grows wild across the Chihuahuan desert and takes 12 to 15 years to mature, and because it won't clone itself the way agave does, Each plant is cut by hand and yields roughly 1 bottle. The spirit runs lean and green, grassy and herbal from plants raised in the mountains, mineral and almost leathery from those raised in the desert. Mexico granted Sotol a denomination of origin in 2002, restricting the name to Chihuahua, Coahuila and Durango. But the desert spoon also grows across the border in West Texas, where distillers sell their own Sotol under the same name. And in 2020, at the request of Texas Senator John Cornyn, the United States declined to recognize Mexico's claim to the word during the USMCA negotiations, a decision that still angers the Mexican families who kept the spirit alive. Comiteco. Comiteco breaks from every spirit before it in 2 ways. It's made in only one small pocket of the country, around the city of Comitán de Domínguez, in the southern state of Chiapas, and it isn't distilled from the roasted heart of the agave. Producers instead tap the living plant for its sweet sap, the agua miel or honey water, ferment that, and distill the result, which makes Comiteco something like the missing link between fermented pulque and distilled mezcal. Dominican monks are believed to have brought distills that started it in the 16th century, and by the mid-1900s its output rivaled tequila. Then it nearly disappeared. In the 1960s, the local agave was cut faster than it could regrow, and rather than watch the plant vanish, authorities banned the spirit outright until the population recovered, a prohibition that held into the 1990s. What comes off the still now is smooth and nearly smokeless, herbal and honeyed with a touch of rum, kept going by a handful of families still coaxing the maguey Comiteco back from the edge. Pulque is the ancestor of every spirit on this list, and the only one that never touches a still. For at least 2,000 years the peoples of central Mexico have made it by fermenting fresh agave sap into a milky, faintly sour drink, with no distillation anywhere in the process, which puts it closer to a beer or a wine than to a spirit. The Aztecs called it Octli and held it sacred, the province of the goddess Mayahuel and 400 rabbit gods, the Tzentzon Totochtin, who presided over every shade of drunkenness. Commoners were mostly forbidden it outside religious festivals, and public drunkenness could carry a death sentence. It ferments in hours and turns within days, which is why it has never traveled beyond Mexico the way its distilled descendants have. By the 1800s, it was the best-selling drink in the country, and that popularity painted a target on it. Around the turn of the 20th century, the rising beer industry bankrolled a smear campaign spreading the claim that pulque was fermented with human excrement, a lie with no foundation that nonetheless steered a nation toward beer and pushed a 2,000-year-old tradition to the brink, where only in the last few years has it begun to climb back.